We would like to ask you to give us an insight into your life and tell us something on the current situation. Which of your stories is worth being told about the pandemic?
Hi there. So this is finally my story worth being told about the pandemic Corona. I live in French Polynesia with my husband, who's from there, and so do our kids. They were born there. And we decided a couple of years ago that we would like to show our kids the world and to show them that there's more to this planet than just the islands of French Polynesia. And we decided to do a trip around the world. It took us 4 years to organize it, to find the right time, to free ourselves from work, to make sure the kids are in the right stage in school where they can skip a year. So a lot of organization to, of course, get the money together to do such a trip and all that. And we each had our favorite destinations. And so finally we managed to get there, and we left in October 2019 from Tahiti to South America, and from there to Europe. And then we went down to South Africa, and we were going to do Namibia and Botswana too, when suddenly right in the middle of South Africa, we had just arrived in the Drakensberg at the pass where you can enter to Lesotho in the southern, in kind of western South Africa, where everybody started panicking from 1 second to the next, and everyone started talking about Corona. We had heard about it and that it would be a pandemic, but heard about lots of other pandemics before. But anyway, people were panicking, and suddenly the next day the whole the whole hostel was nearly empty. And we thought, or maybe this is more serious than we think. And we decided to very spontaneously, within 24 hours, to break off our trip in Africa and to continue to our next destination, Mauritius, which is where actually my husband's mother comes from, and her husband, which is my husband's father-in-law and my husband's stepfather, and someone he was very, very close to when he was 20, till he was 30. And then they had a huge problem, a juridical problem, and his stepfather moved to Mauritius, fighting there for this juridical problem they had. And his mother lived in the south of France, in his stepfather's house, who was French. Yeah, it's a complex story. And anyway, we hadn't seen his stepfather for 10 years. And I thought it was a great moment during this trip around the world to see him again and to hook up with him again, especially for my husband, to spend that time with him and maybe to talk about things and to be good with each other again. So we ended up coming very spontaneously to Mauritius a month earlier than we were supposed to. And he has a house there, but he actually just lives in the small pool hut next to the pool. And the house was meant to be for us to live in. But when we arrived, there were still some French people there who rent the house from time to time. And so we had to spend 5 days with him in the little pool hut of, 30 square meters, the four of us, me, my husband, and the two kids with our backpacks. And we all slept in the same room. And I thought it was amazing of this old man who hadn't seen us for 10 years to just this capacity to share his little space with us. He's 77. He was 77. And to just smile about it. It was great. And so we spent these 5 days with him, and then moved into the big house and waited for the pandemic to come to stop, or to the lockdown to stop. Because what I didn't mention is we arrived on the 18th of March, and on the 21st of March, the whole island shut down. And they didn't just talk about all the Europeans demonstrating and complaining about their lack of freedom. In Mauritius, they just locked the entire island for something like 8 or 9 days everything closed, even the shops, everything. And nobody was allowed to leave the house under no circumstances. It was completely crazy. Thank God we had our grandfather who had contacts, and some people sneaked around the houses and sold bread and fish and to get some food, because we had just arrived and we weren't ready for that. And then after 7-8 days, they opened the country partially. They said everyone can go shopping twice a week. So it was all dependent on the first letter of your last name. And we are called Valadier, so the V was allowed to go shopping on Wednesdays and on Saturdays, and not in couples, but only alone. So the first Wednesday we were allowed to go shopping. My husband left, and he came back 8 hours later. He said he'd been queuing up in front of the supermarket for over 7 hours. And then he had 30 minutes to fly through the supermarket and buy stuff. And he didn't even know that supermarket. He didn't know what product was where. So it was quite an adventure. And he got back. We stayed. We waited. And lockdown was eased out much, much later. I think, if I remember it well, it was only on the 15th of June that things started being, that even the kids could come shopping with us, and it was a crazy lockdown. And all this time we spent with our grandfather that we hadn't seen, and we spent 24 hours 7 with him in a very intense way, and had time to exchange and to laugh and to tell stories, and that was great. And at some point, we had realized that our trip around the world was finished, and that we'd have to go back to Paris to fly back to Tahiti. The only way, because towards the east, where we would naturally have gone, everything was blocked. So we couldn't go via New Zealand or Australia. We had to go back via Paris and Canada to Tahiti. And the day we decided to do that, we started looking for planes. Of course, everything was shut down, and there was only repatriation planes. And once a week, I think, Air Mauritius flew from Mauritius to Paris. And we missed one, and the next one, they could never tell us if there would be a plane the next week. They would never tell us. You'd have to phone. And so we phoned, and they said, yeah, there's a plane. And the next day we went to get our tickets, and they said, no, it's all sold out already. A big machine, over 300 places. So we got a bit upset and said, that's impossible. Don't tell us it's a repatriation flight, that, because there's not now, after 3 months, more than 300 French people who need to be repatriated to France. And shouting helped, because the airline phoned us back the next day and told us finally there's another flight planned a couple of days later. So we decided the next day that we would go straight to the travel agent, straight to the airline, and buy our tickets the next morning. So this is what we did. Next morning we left. We bought our tickets. We came back home at 12. I went to see our grandfather. And he said to me, the last thing he said to me when I left back to our house at the other end of the garden, he said, and did you get your tickets? And I said, yeah, we bought them. It's fine. It's sure. We're going to fly out on Sunday, which was 4 days later. It was Wednesday. And I left. And an hour later, my son came running to our house and informed us that our grandfather had fallen down and wasn't moving. So we ran back to him, and he had actually passed away. He had a heart infarct, a heart attack. And even though we tried reanimating him and called an ambulance, and everything came too late, so grandfather was just simply dead. He had left us all of a sudden, and death is an interesting subject, especially in Corona times. You ask yourself a lot about what life is worth and what death is worth, and how sudden it can come. And of course, my mother-in-law is grieving very strongly, and so is my husband. But in the end, I said to myself, God, were we lucky that we were there for him? And were we lucky that we had 3 months after 10 years of not having seen him, that we spent with him in such a beautiful and intimate way? And basically all I can feel about this whole story now is absolute gratitude. Yeah, and
Why is the story you shared important to you?
yeah, and why the story that I shared is so important to me is that I don't believe in chance. I believe in destiny, and I believe some things happen because most things happen because they're meant to happen. And I have the feeling, I mean, I don't know about the others, but most of the people I spoke to all had a very particular situation during this Corona time. And we all had our own individual lesson to learn in this Corona period. And for me, it was like an invitation from the universe to contemplate on our own life and issues we have, and the way we treat time, and the way we treat people we love, and the way we treat ourselves. And I think it's really important that we always remember that the love we have for other people is one of the major points in life, and all this capitalist ballast, all this stuff that we buy all the time, and all our lives are full of shops and publicity and consume, and it's not about that. Life is much more about, if you ask me, life is much more about beautiful sunsets and standing in a soft breeze and hugging a person that means a lot to you, or seeing the grandfather after 10 years and spending 3 months with him in peace. No one working, no one going to school, eating together, laughing together, discussing politics and philosophy, and discussing with him how will the world be after Corona. Well, he'll never know. I think he'll never know. I don't know where he is now. But it wasn't that important. The most important was that we were there at that very moment. The importance of the presence. Yeah. Thank you.